in this video, I'm going to explain how to make a quick and easy to use local Vagrant box where you can develop your WordPress sites and have a local instance of a WordPress server running on a Linux operating system using Vagrant with the VirtualBox, Salt, which is a deployment automation tool, and Gulp, and then WordPress itself. So you're going to have a server locally that you can run, and that will give you a local WordPress instance, and you can start building your custom WordPress theme in there. So the focus is that it's going to be very easy to deploy and get up and running. I basically have created a template for you on GitHub. So if you head over to github.com/LondonAppDev, I'll put the link in the video comments. But if you head over here then and click on repositories, I have this WordPress dev template. So this is basically the template for the basically a clean project template for WordPress themes that I make. So this kind of is the starting point for making a WordPress theme. So in here it includes a deploy folder, which is going to have the local deployment configuration. It's got an SRC folder, which is going to have the source code for the theme, and then it's got a bunch of other files here. So if you go ahead and clone that to your local machine, before you do that, if you don't have Vagrant and VirtualBox installed, then go ahead and install Vagrant and VirtualBox. So you can get that basically if you just go to Google and you search VirtualBox, you can download VirtualBox and install that from their website, and then the same for Vagrant. So if you go to vagrantup.com, and you can download Vagrant for your operating system. So once that's done, you'll be able to clone the Git repository that I've done and then follow along with me, or you can just watch the video. I'll explain it all, explain how it works in the video. So I have the project locally. I'm just going to pull that up now in Workspace. Press Dev. So I'll open that in my Atom editor. So I'm going to talk through each of the basic setup of this template project, and then you can either use my version of it or you can go ahead and create your own. Just commit these uncommitted changes. Okay, cool. So this is a project that I've just made. I've basically took the one that I use for the website, londonappdeveloper.com, and I just removed all the London App Developer specific stuff and left kind of a shell, a basic shell that can be reused by for me on other projects or by other developers, which is on GitHub. So the project features a deploy folder, as I mentioned, and inside the deploy folder, this is where your local development servers is created, basically. So it's created with this Vagrant file. So the way that you run it is you, if you go to your terminal and then you navigate to the project, once you have Vagrant and VirtualBox installed, you can just go to the project/deploy and do Vagrant up, and this will create a server for you on your machine. It can take 10-15 minutes depending on the speed of your internet, because it needs to download the image. But once it's done, it should just automatically install everything. It automatically installs a WordPress instance. It automatically maps the Vagrant folder to the WordPress themes directory so that you can more or less instantly start developing. So I'll talk through I'll break down each thing that this project does. So it has a Vagrant file, which is a configuration for a local development server. So you can see here setting the box to a Debian/Jessie64. That could be a Ubuntu box if you wanted. I prefer to use Debian because I use it on my live servers, but this could easily be Ubuntu if that's what you're more comfortable with. And then this is the host name of the box. So it's called London App Dev 3. You could change this to your project name. And then it basically says provision, run the shell script here, which is Bootstrap.sh. And then it has these synced folders. So it has basically .. means go back into the previous directory or the parent directory and map that folder. So it basically maps everything that you see here. Because it runs from the deploy folder, it needs to go a step back and map everything from this point. And map that to /Vagrant. And I use type NFS because I use Node Package Manager, and that requires some symlinks and stuff to be created. So I find it always works better when you use the type NFS for that, but these other ones are just standard. So they're just standard sync folders. So these two sync folders are the Salt and Pillar. So if you're not familiar with Salt, it's an automation deployment tool. You don't really need to know much about it to run this project, but it is what basically does all the provisioning of the applications and everything that run on the server. So yeah, I basically have created some pre-made Salt stack formulas. They're all available on my GitHub page. And that performs different things that the server requires to run. So, for example, it installs the Nginx web server, installs a WordPress instance, and it installs other various development tools and stuff that you need to run the project locally. So you got that. These two folders are related to that. So the Salt is the actual instructions of what to install. It tells the server exactly what to install, and Pillar is the server specific kind of variables for that thing. So it includes things like the passwords and the host names and things like that, stuff that would be specific to a server. So and then down here you have the forwarded port. So this is going to forward the guest port. So the guest is the operating system that it starts. So that's the Linux server. It's going to forward port 80 on that to port 8081 on our local machine. The host port can be whatever you prefer. I chose 8081 because I have other things running on the other port, so it needs to be unique. You can't have multiple applications running on the same port. And then this config.vm.provision is the Salt provisioner for Vagrant. The Vagrant Salt provisioner basically says provision using Salt, and these are Salt specific things. So this is run high state, which means basically take it to the highest state in the Salt formulas. This is masterless because we're not going to have a Salt master with the Salt deployment platform. You can basically have a master server, and that manages what they call the Minion servers. But we're not going to have a master. We're going to be masterless, and we're just going to be a little minion running on its own that can do what it wants. So that's the Vagrant file. That's basically where everything starts in the kind of development box. Let's make this big. So let's go into some of these files. So the first thing it runs, this is, as I said, is just the operating system and the server name. The next thing it runs is the Bootstrap.sh. So let's go and have a look at that file, Bootstrap.sh. This simply does a sudo apt-get update and then sudo apt-get install python git. And that the reason I do that, and the reason it's not part of this Salt stack deployment, because this is exactly what Salt is for, in installing things like this. But the reason I include it as a shell script instead of a Salt formula is because Salt itself requires these dependencies to run, because we're pulling some Salt formulas from Git, so it needs the Python Git package installed for it to run. So that's why that's done in this file here. Other than that, everything else is done by the Salt provisioner. Go back to the Vagrant file. So that's that. So the next is the synced folders. We know what that does. I'll take you through the the Minion file. So this is basically this Salt config file. So the Minion file is the Salt configuration file. So we're going to there. Again, this is all pretty standard Salt stuff. So if you're interested in learning Salt, then I'd recommend going over to the Salt Stack website. If you just Google Salt Stack, they got some good tutorials and stuff on there. But you don't really need to know a whole lot of detail about how it works or how to do it, just to get this development box up and running, because I've created all these formulas for you already, so they're all ready to go. But if you are interested, you can always have a look through the code on GitHub. Or go through the guides. But this file, the Minion file, basically it says use these two backends. So the root
file server backend is routes is what it calls these files that we've mapped. So the root file of the salt directory. So this is mapped to the server under /srv/salt. So root says look at that for our to figure out what to install on the server, and git is the second thing it will look at. So say look at both this and git, our git remotes, to get a list of all the available salt states that can be ran on the server. And then we configure the git fs, which is the git file system. So we say the base, we're going to use the develop branch because it's a development server. I point it to the develop branch of my git repositories. And then these remotes, git fs, git file server remotes, it's saying pull in these git formulas from GitHub onto the server. So the reason I do this is so I don't need to duplicate this code for every project that I do, because it's more than just WordPress uses these. I use these formulas for more than just WordPress. This is actually what I'm deploying on my live servers. So this saves a hell of a lot of time in that I don't need to reproduce the code. Each time I do a development project, I just paste in these lines and then it pulls in and it has a formula for you. You can see by the name what they do. So this is Node.js formula. This installs and configures Node.js. This installs and configures MariaDB, which is a MySQL fork from when MySQL got purchased by got purchased by Oracle. So I use MariaDB for everything because it's like pure open source. And it's a really good solution for a kind of a replacement MySQL server or MySQL database. And then this is my Nginx formula, so it installs a simple Nginx and adds the sites and stuff. And then this is a WordPress sites formula. So this is where most of the work happens, where it actually installs the WordPress site for us to use. So that's the Minion file. So basically, the Minion file tells it where to get all of the possible formulas, salt formulas that I can use. And then this salt directory, the top file, tells it what to install out of these. So it says install Node.js, Nginx, PHP, MariaDB, WordPress. So these all map to the formulas, the public formulas that I put on the GitHub. So you got Node.js there, Nginx is both Nginx and PHP, MariaDB is there, and then WordPress sites is there. And then this dev is this local one. So anything, it will match with any local names any names of the local files that you put here. So dev is basically what we just install on that local server. So because I don't reproduce these things that much, I don't have it on a public formula. I have it locally. So this is this basically says install these tools. So install these packages. So it installs Vim, Screen, wget, Subversion, and curl. And then it installs Gulp with using npm. And then this is the important bit that saves you a lot of time. It maps the it creates a symbolic link from the our local Vagrant distribution or the project folder where the project files are of our WordPress theme. It maps that to the actual location of where the projects are on the server. So this means that when we make changes on our dev box, it automatically updates on our on the server, and we can just refresh the page, and any changes we do in our editor here will be reflected on our on our WordPress site. So that's the dev tools, and the pillar is again I'll take you through that real quick. So again, just like the salt directory, you have a pillar which contains all of the kind of personalized information for that server. So if you look in top, this basically just says you need to have a base here, and then it says all servers give it the WordPress dev. Because we're only running on one server, we don't need to worry too much about what this means. This is more for when you're deploying on multiple servers and you're running Salt for your production servers or deploying your server farm, whatever. So it basically just says take this one WordPress dev pillar and use those
details for the config, so I'll show you that now. So it might look a little bit confusing at first, but it's really quite simple. This is the MariaDB is the configuration that you need for your MariaDB or MySQL server. So I just give it a root password of just password. And then you got your WordPress site. So we only have one site. As I use this formula in production, and I have multiple WordPress sites running in production. This allows me to create multiple sites, but for this dev project, I only use one. So you simply put the WordPress source. It's the actual source code for WordPress. This gets it directly from WordPress.org. It's currently version 4.6.1, and then this WordPress source hash. It's a requirement. It's a security requirement when you're downloading a file in the automation software. It's a security requirement that you include this because it makes sure that it knows that it's downloading the correct file, not some DNS spoofed hacked version of the file, or someone trying to do something bad, basically. So this is a security mechanism. You can get this from the actual WordPress site, but I just tend to leave this on this version, and then you can upgrade it through the WordPress interface once you've got the server online. And this is the base sites that, again, you don't need to worry too much about these specific details. The main things that you might want to know are the connection user and user password here, so that I'm just going to use root and password to connect to the database, and then the WordPress details here. The site domain, it needs to be localhost because we're going to be using localhost to connect to the server, and then these are just all specifics for the WordPress details. They go into the WordPress config file, and it also sets up the databases that are required and stuff in the user and with the password you give. And then these are the file users for the actual files on the server. We just give it www.data, and then this is the auth salts and keys. This is just a WordPress requirement. You can get a unique version. I set it up so you can get a unique version of this, and you can just get them from the WordPress auth keys. They have a really convenient page here which will generate these for you automatically. It's more for when you're running a site in production. It's a security thing. It's the hashes and the keys and stuff that it uses to protect your sensitive data in the database. So you can just paste that in there for your server, and then you just got to give it enough tabs across. But you probably won't need to worry about that for the dev version. So that's the salt and the salt pillar. That's basically what provisions the server. So let me actually log into the server and show you actually how it works. So I can close this off. So you see here I already had it running, so it just instantly ran. But if I go once you load it, when you type Vagrant up to load it, and then you can type Vagrant SSH, and then if you go for cd/vagrant, you can see that this maps these files directly from this directory that we do here into here. So we actually create a new file, test, and you type ls. You can see that it creates the file there. If you delete test on the server, it deletes it from here as well. I find that just really incredible. It saves me so much time since when I found Vagrant years ago. It just was such an amazing thing because I used to actually set up scripts and stuff to synchronize my local development files to the server every time I saved and all that stuff. It was just an absolute nightmare. This just takes care of all of that for you. So yeah, once the server's up and running, you've done Vagrant up, you can open your browser and you can just go localhost, and then the port is you got to remember the port number is whatever number you put in here. So if you get some issue when you're loading up Vagrant, it's like the port is already in use, you could just change this port number, but just remember to change it in the browser. So because I just created this site earlier, or this the VM, this Vagrant box earlier, I just switched it on earlier. It's a brand new WordPress install. So the first thing you'll come to is this page.
So it's a standard WordPress setup. So we just give it a test site or test site title, test site, and we'll call it Mark. And give it a very, very weak password of Mark. Confirm the usage of that. And then give my email address. We'll discourage search engine, not that they could ever see it anyway because it's behind a private firewall, but we'll click that anyway and then click install. So this will go ahead and create our WordPress install. So that's WordPress's setup of creating the database and stuff. And we can now log into the WordPress admin site. And here we have our WordPress install. So this should just be, it should just take minutes to get this up and running. Once you have all the dependencies installed and everything, you literally just clone the project that I did, go to the deploy directory and just type Vagrant up, and you've got this WordPress setup ready to go. And then if we go to themes, now hopefully this worked. I didn't test this yet. Yes, there it is. So my new theme. So and that maps to our theme folder on our project. So what I'll do now is before I activate it, I'll just talk you through a bit how I've done the theme. So you could do a very simple version, or a very basic version. If you don't want to go into using like automation tools or deployment tools like Gulp, which is what I've done in this project, what you can do is you can just, instead of in this source folder, you just literally put your source code for your theme directly in here, just as a standard theme, and then in this Salt deploy dev thing, you would just map the symlink to that src folder instead of to this distribution. But what I've done here is, because my projects tend to use things like Sass and Bootstrap with less and all kinds of things. I like to do stuff like minifying the JavaScript and minifying the CSS for the deployment, and run all these processes, and I have all this done on my Jenkins server. I can go into that in a later video, but basically I like to set my projects up with that. So I have a little bit more complicated system for setting up my projects, but it saves me a lot of time later because of the automation and stuff. So what I do is I put everything in my src folder, source folder. This is my source code, and my theme, all the PHP files go in here in this PHP folder. Well, actually, this is the base. The PHP is the base folder, so I actually have this CSS file in here as well. This is because the CSS, this style.css file, as you probably know if you're a WordPress developer, this is required for the theme, and it actually holds the metadata for the theme details. So it's more than just a style.css folder. In fact, I don't even use this one for my CSS because I use Sass. So I keep the CSS separate, and I just have this as my metadata for the site. So everything, all the PHP files plus the metadata CSS file I put in here. And then I put all of the JavaScript files in JS, and all of the images in image, and then all of the CSS I put in Sass. There's a bug flying on my screen. I think I got it. Okay, so the Sass has all the CSS files and all the CSS I use in Sass, and then what I do is I pull it all together using Gulp. So this is all included in the base folder, so you shouldn't have to like change any of this unless you want to add to it. But this basically processes my images, my JS, JavaScript, my CSS, PHP, and the build, and PHP, and it brings it all together in this build command, and it outputs everything into this dist folder. So this is kind of the dist distribution, the ready to deploy, ready to go on the server kind of files. And then so this is what I have mapped to my directory. So that's how I do my deployment there. So if I show you now, if I go, I actually did a previous project about using AngularJS and Gulp, and I might do another one about how to do WordPress in Gulp because it's quite useful. But what you could do is if you just go to /vagrant, you could do gulp
dev. And what this will do is it will build the initial version of the dist folder, and then it will listen for any changes, and it will rebuild as you make changes. So if we now go over to our project or our WordPress theme, we can activate this. Now, when we go to our site, it literally just has start your theme here. And then, so in here you basically make your theme. So WordPress theme obviously has more than just these two files, and the purpose of this video isn't to explain how to make a WordPress theme. But if you basically would build your WordPress theme in here, and then it would deploy and it'll be automatically pushed to the server. And then if you need to share it with someone else or have another developer work on it, then you'd simply just send them this Git repository, and they can just go to the deploy folder, and then they type Vagrant up, and then boom, they're up and running, and they can develop. So it should automatically update the changes when we save. So we load that. When I save, you should see it. There you go, you saw it change there, so it detected a change, and then we refresh and it just does that. So basically in real time it's listening in the background, so you just need to refresh the page and all your changes get deployed there. So yeah, hopefully you find this useful. I'd be interested to hear if anyone else has any other cool, interesting ways to automate their kind of the development environment for their WordPress or other projects. So yeah, I hope you found this useful, and thank you so much for watching.